Mega Man, Mega Man, Mega Man, or Rockman as he's known in Japan. He's probably one of the most easily identifiable video game characters of all time, and is certainly one of the big faces for Capcom. If it's not Resident Evil or Ghosts and Goblins people think of whenever they hear the name Capcom, it was most likely Mega Man.
We're only going to be talking about the first 6 games on the NES. And why 6, you may ask? Well, because as a lot of you know, Mega Man games don't really change a whole lot between installments. So for now, I'm not also going to be going through Mega Man 7 through 10, or the X series, or Mega Man Base, or God knows how many other spin-off games there are. We're just going to be keeping it simple and sticking with the classic series. So without further ado, let's begin with Mega Man 1 for the NES.
Starting off with the story, we follow a scientist by the name of Dr. Thomas Light, who creates 6 robots that were made to perform individual tasks for the sake of helping mankind, such as construction, electrical work, or working at extreme temperatures. In addition, he's also built 2 more robots to act as lab assistants called Rock and Roll.
Oh Jesus, Capcom.
Assisting him in building these robots is another scientist called Dr. Albert Wily. In short, Dr. Light got more attention for making the robots than Dr. Wily did, and as a result, Wily fills himself with jealousy and decides to reprogram the 6 robots to help him take over the world.
If that's not a sore loser, then I don't know what is.
However, Dr. Wily stupidly missed out on both Rock and Roll because he didn't see potential for them, and in doing so, Rock volunteers to be converted into a fighting robot. Thus, Dr. Light Reconstruction provides Rock with armor and an arm cannon, and this is where Mega Man was born. The ultimate goal of the game is to destroy all the 6 robots, now referred to as Robot Masters, and then to finally confront against Dr. Wily himself. What was new at the time was that you were actually able to choose which stage you wanted to go to. Nowadays it may not seem like much, but back then it was revolutionary. If you got sick of playing through one stage over and over again, then you could just switch to another stage and try to conquer that one. Mega Man pretty much plays like your average side-scrolling platform shooter, where you have to go through numerous obstacles, shoot to kill baddies, and defeat a Robot Master at the end of each one. However, one of the main things that Mega Man games differentiate themselves from is the ability to use each of the Robot Master's weapons after beating them, if you have enough ammo for it. To start off with, Mega Man can only use his arm cannon to shoot out little pellets, which does do a good job of taking down enemies by itself, but the other weapons you can obtain have some advantages as well. For example, Iceman's weapon can be used to freeze enemies in place, while Gutsman's weapon allows you to pick up certain blocks to either go through an alternate path, or to simply throw them at your enemies to clear some space. These are some things you might want to consider experimenting with to see what gives you an easier time in the game, especially since this is considered to be one of the hardest games on the NES. It's not quite Castlevania, Zelda 2, or Ghosts and Goblins standards, but it's not too far off. This is from a mixture of things: enemy placement, subpar level design, knockback which can lead you to bottomless pits, and Mega Man's overall control. Not only does he feel like he's walking on ice all the time, which can sometimes lead you to fatal death, but Mega Man is restricted to only shooting in a horizontal manner for some arbitrary reason. Not to mention that he can't do a whole lot in terms of mobility apart from jumping and shooting. You thought the original Metroid's controls were limited? Well, check out Mega Man. There's also this one really annoying glitch where even when you're in that brief invincibility state after being hit, you can still instantly die to the spikes upon touching them. The later games will fix this, but in the meantime I hope you don't have a phobia for pointy things. You know what really bugs me though? Not just for this game, but for all Mega Man games in general? There is a huge lack of checkpoints. In fact, I think each level only has a total of 2. One in the middle of the stage, and the other just before the boss. No amount of words can describe the frustration of getting really far ahead of the starting point, only to die just near the checkpoint, booting you back to the beginning of the freaking stage. Don't be surprised to find enemies blindsiding you either, which further adds to that level of frustration, most likely tempting you to break your controller. Not only is Mega Man able to use these extra weapons on enemies, but each of the Robot Masters are weak to a specific one. While it's definitely possible to take them all down with only your arm cannon, using their weaknesses will deal a significant amount of damage to them, maybe even destroy them in 3 or 4 hits. This concept was inspired by the likes of Rock, Paper, Scissors, so think of it like that when trying to figure out what each of the Robot Masters are weak to. Although good luck trying to beat Fireman without taking a hit. God, do I hate this guy. His fire attacks come out of complete random and he uses them so rapidly that they're impossible to dodge. I do not recommend using Mega Man's normal weapon on this guy because even with his weakness, he'll only barely survive the battle. Like I mentioned before, some of the weapons you can get do help a fair bit, but as you probably suspect, there are some that are practically worthless. I never use Bomb Man's weapon because the bombs take too long to blow up and by the time it does, it pretty much misses the enemy. The only time that it helps is when you're up against Gutsman because he's weak to it. His weapon's not too great either. I can hardly ever hit the enemies with the giant blocks, and they're especially pointless when they're plastered in a line, leading to extremely easy to reach pickups, almost as if they're just there to annoy you. Electman's weapon, however, is awesome. It hurts more than Mega Man's normal arm cannon and is also capable of firing vertically as well as in front of you. In his stage, you can also find the Magnet Beam, which briefly lets you walk across platforms that you fire out, skipping any challenges you don't feel like doing, like those awkwardly timed disappearing blocks you've got to get through in order to cross a large gap. Don't get too used to it though, because as far as I know, this is the only game in the series that has it. What the f*** happened there? When all the Robot Masters are defeated, you're then ready to take on Dr. Wily himself. Usually in a Mega Man game, there are 3 stages you need to tackle before reaching them in the 4th and final stage, each of them ending with a boss that also have a weakness to one of your weapons. Again, like the Robot Masters, you can use your normal arm cannon if you want to, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. I don't understand why everybody thinks the Yellow Devil is so difficult. He always splits up in a certain order, so just memorize the pattern on his legs and then booyah, he's toast. Sure, you'll most likely die to him a few times and maybe even get a game over or two, but once you figure out the best way to avoid him, you shouldn't really have too much trouble with this guy. Or he can be a cheater and use the famous pause glitch that can score you multiple hits by continuously pausing and unpausing. Anyway, the Wily stages basically consist of tightly combined obstacles that you've already gone through in the previous stages, and as expected, are much harder to accomplish. The Magnet Beam is also required to finish the first Wily stage, which means if you didn't get an Electman stage, then you're screwed, and you need to start the whole game all over again. That's a pretty douchey move, Capcom. Speaking of Electman though, the second Wily stage also has him reconstructed, as well as Cutman, thus having to do a rematch for both of them. The Wily stages in general, as for this game, also make the problems I mentioned earlier the most apparent. There will be plenty of times where you'll have a lot of momentum on your hands, and as a result, causes you to skyrocket towards bottomless pits and spikes. Not to mention that 1 or 2 of the enemies also have unpredictable patterns, which makes it really hard to time your shot or your jump just right. Then there's the final level, Wily Stage 4. As well as being a bit concerning as to why Dr. Wily has statues of Gutsman lying around, you also have to refight the other 4 reconstructed Robot Masters in a row and with no health pickups. To make things worse, Fireman is one of said Robot Masters, and goddamn it, he keeps kicking my ass! And then after that you've got to deal with Dr. Wily himself, who thankfully isn't too much of a challenge. Yeah, he can hurt a little, but his attacks are overall much easier to avoid than the likes of Fireman. Well, with Dr. Wily defeated, he claims he's not worthy, which he's going to be doing in a lot of Mega Man games, and Mega Man just kinda leaves him. Why the hell did he do that? Was exploding his machine good enough as a punishment? Did Mega Man secretly give him a disciplinary spanking or something? I'd like a little more than just Mega Man leaves Wily's fortress, changes back into rock, and calls it a day. So that's the first Mega Man game, which surprisingly didn't sell a whole lot, despite being pretty well loved at the time. I'm not exactly sure as to why that is, but one thing's for sure, while it is fun in its own way, I personally wouldn't recommend starting off your Mega Man experience with this one, because the sequels just do a much better job. Graphically it looks okay, I guess, but again, the sequels improve upon that, as well as the music. That's not saying Mega Man 1's soundtrack is terrible, mind you, but it's definitely not anything spectacular either. It's a shame too, because I think it would have helped ease the stress of going through some of the more bullshit parts of the game. You can also find a remake of it on the PSP, but I've never played it, so I don't know how it is yet. But if you're curious as to how Mega Man first started, then go ahead and play the NES version. If you're just getting into the series, however, then you're probably best off looking somewhere else. I'll give it a 7.3 out of 10, standing for containing every design quirk you love to hate. Thus bringing us to Mega Man 2, released 1 year after the first game. Now, since the stock market for that game didn't do so well, Capcom originally wanted to scrap Mega Man entirely and move on to other projects. There eventually came a decision that Capcom would get to work on other games while simultaneously working on Mega Man 2 in their free time.
Jeez, talk about a lack of dedication.
The plot, like before, is pretty basic stuff. After Wily's defeat, he's created 8 new Robot Masters to simply take down Mega Man and attempt to take over the world once again. As Mega Man, it's your job to rid of these new Robot Masters, acquire their abilities, and stop Dr. Wily and his bosses once again. Mega Man's movement control has definitely seen a significant improvement since the last game. I still think he may have just a tad bit too much momentum, but it's better nonetheless. The graphics are also much prettier to look at this time around, with each stage given its own color scheme and themes, giving them more character than the constant blue, gray, and green textures that were present in the first game. The stages also have distinctive obstacles you need to conquer. For example, Metal Man's stage has you traversing through numerous conveyor belts, while Quick Man's stage has these rather infamous lasers you need to try and outmaneuver as fast as you can. There are just a lot less cheap moments when it comes to the level design as a whole. Now, this does make the game nowhere near as hard as the first game, but as a result, it makes for a much more satisfying experience. Not to mention that the soundtrack is fantastic, which just makes the adventure all the more epic. To this day, Mega Man 2's music is still considered to be one of the best soundtracks on the NES, and that's something I wholeheartedly agree with. While it's not my favorite NES soundtrack of all time, I certainly can't deny that there's a lot of damn good stuff in it. Heatman's theme does get a little dull, however, and Wily Stage 3 and 4's theme just hurts my ears after a while. I also hated that the beginning of the boss theme always cuts out whenever their health fills up. It's just really annoying and distracting. But tunes like Bubbleman's and Woodman's are definitely stuff I can jam to for quite a while. Do I even need to mention how freaking popular the Dr. Wily Stage 1 and 2 theme is? This theme has been remixed God knows how many times, but it really is an incredible tune, and I'd recommend giving it a listen if you somehow managed to avoid it for 25 years. I would show you some of the new toys that Mega Man can play with, but unfortunately, for the most part, I always use Metal Man's Metal Blades, one of the most game-breaking weapons in video game history. It uses very little ammo, does more damage than Mega Man's standard arm cannon, and you can throw them in all directions, practically replacing the normal weapon.
So Mega Man can throw stuff in all directions, but he can still only shoot directly in front of him. Capcom, you really do have a weird sense of logic. Thank God you made good games.
Now you could just tell me not to equip the Metal Blades, but I can't help myself when I know that there's an extremely powerful weapon at my disposal. The only other weapons I use apart from the Metal Blades is Flashman's to freeze time and make Quickman's stage a bit easier, and Airman's weapon to get rid of these overly tough mechs in one shot. New to Mega Man's arsenal, however, are gadgets that can be acquired by defeating certain Robot Masters and receiving a message from Dr. Light. The names are probably the most generic you can think of, though. Items 1, 2, and 3. Wow, that's lame. Well, despite their boring names, they can be pretty useful at times, particularly Item 2 for getting past these annoying disappearing blocks in Heatman's stage. As for the Robot Masters themselves, well, like last time, if you know their weaknesses then they shouldn't be too much of a problem, with the exception of Woodman and Airman. They're not hard or anything, but Woodman's Leaf Shield is a pretty big hitbox which makes timing your jumps very difficult to get right, and I swear to God that Airman's Wind Gusts are impossible to avoid. I've tried everything, but I cannot for the life of me figure out how to dodge this bastard's highly formed attacks. These are definitely some of my least favorite Robot Masters in the Mega Man series. I suppose the last thing to mention is that Mega Man 2 also has a difficulty option. The only difference being that you take slightly more damage than before, Robot Masters have more hit points, and recovery items are not quite as frequent. Oh, and speaking of recovery items, Mega Man 2 was the first game in the series to introduce energy tanks. At any time you want to, you can use them to refill your health, which makes encounters with tough levels and bosses a little more soothing. You can only carry 4 of them though, and you lose them if you get a game over, so do yourself a favor and hold on to them. When you've defeated all 8 Robot Masters, it's time to take down Dr. Wily yet again. These Wily stages are definitely nowhere near as difficult as last time, although there are a few bullshit moments here and there. The Dragon Boss at the end of Wily Stage 1, for example, has a lot of sprite flickering, which makes it very hard to see the platforms you're supposed to be standing on. Mega Man 2 does have a lot of sprite flickering before this, but the Dragon Boss is definitely where it's at its worst. Wily Stage 3 is also filled to the brim with instant death spikes, all to just make it worth the buck you paid for it. This somewhat carries on to Wily Stage 4, but that's not its biggest problem, it's its jackass at the end. There are several turrets scattered around the room, and its only weakness is Crashman's weapon, which you have very few shots of. If you run out and die to the turrets, then you're going to have to spend a good chunk of your time grinding for ammo so you can take out the ones left to get. Or you'll need to lose all of your lives to refill everything with the expense of starting to level over again. And I hate having to grind in games, so you can imagine how much this part infuriates me. Well, if you can make it past the turret boss, then making their debut is the Boss Rush Room, where you have to refight all 8 Robot Masters before battling against Dr. Wily. Mega Man 1 did it to some degree at the final stage, but this was the first time that all the Robot Masters were together. Oh yeah, Metal Man is apparently weak to his own weapon. Dr. Wily himself is an absolute pushover, again thanks to the sheer effectiveness of the Metal Blades. However, upon defeating him again, we see Dr. Wily quickly escape and lead us to a hidden level in the game. Don't get too worried about this though, it's a pretty short segment. But I will say that the atmosphere is creepy, especially since there's no music and you have this stuff dripping out of the walls, which I'm assuming is blood. Anyway, upon reaching the end, we see that Dr. Wily turns into an alien, but by blasting a few bubbles into him, no seriously, it's actually Wily using a hologram. He begs for his mercy, and for God's sake, Mega Man leaves him again? And why is he taking this depressing walk through the seasons? Did I miss something? Expand your stories, Capcom! Expand your stories! Well, not too long after, the more cheery and upbeat music comes in to play us out. So Mega Man 2 as a whole is without a doubt much better than the likes of Mega Man 1, but there are still quite a few problems with it. The more frustrating segments are just too difficult to ignore, and for a series that's all about experimenting with different weapons, you only really need the Metal Blades in order to beat the game. Now I know that's what multiple playthroughs are for, to see how many ways you can get to Wily, but I'm sadly just not that sort of gamer. I feel that the usefulness of the weapons simply need to be a little more balanced, and that I shouldn't be urged to stick with one weapon that could potentially break the game. Then the checkpoint system is still crap. Seriously, is that ever going to be fixed? But where there are some flawed designs, there are also some really good ones. The graphics, like I said, are far superior to the first game, and the levels are for the most part structured very well. This is definitely one Mega Man game you should consider playing if you already haven't done so. And it's maybe even a good one to start off with if you're just getting into the series. Mega Man 2 gets an 8.2 out of 10, standing for good fun but a lack of weapon experimentation. So, 1 year after the release of Mega Man 2 came Mega Man 3, what's said to be one of Capcom's most stressful games to make in the series. Dr. Wily, since the events of Mega Man 2, has realized the errors of his ways and decides to build his peacekeeping robot with Dr. Light named Gamma. However, 8 robot masters in charge of mining areas go berserk, and each of them make off with one of Gamma's power crystals. In addition, there's a new robot you need to deal with called Breakman. It's up to Mega Man to retrieve each of these crystals and stop the robot masters and Breakman before they can do any more damage. If you play Mega Man 2, then you should feel right at home with the gameplay. New to the series though is the slide maneuver, which is not only necessary to crawl through narrow spaces, but is also an effective way to dodge enemy attacks. This is pretty sweet, and it also makes traveling through the levels a bit quicker, and I'm all for getting by the game at a fast pace.
Well, unless if it's Sonic the Hedgehog. What? How do you fast in those games? There's an enemy like every 2 steps.
The gadgets are also a bit different this time. Mega Man now has a new companion called Rush, a robot dog that can be used to bounce to higher areas, transform into a submarine to shoot bad guys underwater, and a hoverboard to fly across gaps. Rush is an awesome addition to the series. The sensation you feel when collecting hard-to-reach collectibles and the tension you get when crossing gaps without losing all of your ammo is a great way to keep you on your toes. The gadgets from Mega Man 2 were fine on their own, but I like it that there's another character that can provide some extra help for Mega Man, and thus creating a strong bond between the two and having the players care about them more. The concept of the Metal Blades make a return, now known as the Shadow Blades, but it's definitely a lot more restricted than last time. For one thing, you can't use them downwards diagonally anymore, and you can only throw them in a short range as well as only being able to throw one at a time. It also acts a bit like a boomerang, so it can kill any enemies you miss after you throw it. This is a pretty nifty power-up, and I'm glad Capcom has learned their lesson from Mega Man 2, thus encouraging you to use the other weapons you can obtain. I do still end up using the Shadow Blades for the most part, but some of the other power-ups have their advantages as well. Hard Man's weapon, for example, is good for taking out bigger enemies that take a lot of hits, and Magna Man's ability is incredibly useful for taking down any annoying airborne enemies, like these parachuting robots in Shadow Man's stage. Just don't rely on Top Man's weapon though. It's one of the most useless power-ups in the Mega Man universe. I'm serious, no one likes this weapon at all. It does very little damage to the enemies, the ammo can seriously run dry if you don't position yourself right, and it seems that you can't do any damage to the enemy unless you damage yourself. At various points in some of the levels, your progression is interrupted by Breakman, where all he does is jump in a straight line and try to shoot you. And I'm being very generous by saying try. There is zero strategy involved with this guy. You just need to keep shooting at him and occasionally slide. That's it. You don't even need to jump because he always shoots above your head. Hey, Mr. Man, is it? Try shooting lower. Oh, wait, but he has another tactic. After he gets to one side of the room, he then turns around and continuously jumps. Oh god, how am I meant to avoid this? He's not coming from the right this time, he's coming from the left! He is extremely difficult to dodge. When you defeat all the Robot Masters, we're then introduced to Doc Robots, who have invaded half of the stages we've just been through and mimic the Robot Masters we fought in Mega Man 2. This is the infamous part of the game that really put people off, and I honestly can't blame them. First of all, the checkpoints in these stages are worse than ever. You have to fight 2 Doc Robots in each level, and if you die to any of them, you're forced to go back to the beginning of the stage. There's a checkpoint after you defeat the first Doc Robot halfway through the level, but good luck trying to keep your lives intact. The Doc Robots pack quite a punch and it's very easy to get hit by them, so don't be surprised to see yourself near death by the time you defeat one of them. Not only that, but Doc Robots don't appear anywhere else in the game, or in the series for that matter, so this whole section is entirely pointless and a terrible way to add more time to the gameplay. Well, if you can beat all the Doc Robots, then you need to face Breakman one more time and finish him off for good. Jesus, he's still stupidly simple. What is the point of this guy? You know, something tells me he's not really the bad guy. Well, what a shocker. Breakman was meant to distract Mega Man while Dr. Wily invades Dr. Light's lab and steals Gamma. So in addition to Doc Robot levels, we once again have 4 Wily levels to go through. Thankfully, they're much more forgiving than the Doc Robot levels. Perhaps a little too forgiving. Wily has left quite a number of energy tanks, which you can now carry 9 of by the way, extra lives, and health and ammo pickups, to make what's possibly some of the easiest Wily Fortress levels in Mega Man history. Yellow Devil makes a return here, but fortunately for most players, he moves a lot more slowly than last time, and thanks to the slide maneuver, makes him a little easier to avoid. I can't seem to figure out how to dodge his bouncing body attack though. Does anyone have a solution to that? But as for the other bosses, they're pretty easy to beat. Look at this one with a robot turtle, where he moves insanely slowly and has his currents push you instead of hurt you. Dr. Wily himself isn't that much of a challenge either, thanks to Rush Jet, but it doesn't take Mega Man 2 long to find out that the Wily he just fought turns out to be a fake and goes after the real Dr. Wily in the final stage. The last level only consists of one room with a bunch of pickups and the final battle itself, with Dr. Wily now inside Gamma. By the way, doesn't Gamma look strangely similar to Gutsman? What is this guy's deal with him? Does he secretly want to know what it's like to screw around with a robot and Gutsman just happened to be the most handsome robot in the room? There's a really sick obsession with this guy here. Anyway, after you use Wily's weakness, which is the top spin of all things, he begs for his forgiveness yet again, but the fortress begins to collapse, with a bit of debris falling on top of the Doctor. Immediately after, a silhouette that looks like Brakeman appears and saves Mega Man. Taking him back to Dr. Light, he tells Mega Man that the whistle Brakeman makes sounds a lot like another robot he built called Proto Man. And while watching through the ending, where they give statistics of Mega Man 1 robots for some reason, shows that Brakeman was actually Proto Man, the brother of Mega Man. To go with the music motif, Proto Man is also known as Blues in Japan.
What is it with this series and its music references?
So that's Mega Man 3. In some ways it's better than Mega Man 2, but in other cases it's not. The gameplay can still be pretty enjoyable, but it's the Doc robots that ruin a huge part of the experience for me. But aside from that, some of the weapons are pretty cool to use, and the ability to use Rush is something I highly welcome. I'm not really going to say what I think of the story, because that's never been Capcom's specialty anyway, so it'd be pretty redundant if I just pointed out the blatantly obvious. Graphically it looks really nice, just like Mega Man 2, but sadly the soundtrack isn't quite as good in my opinion. There are some stuff I kinda like, but it's not enough for me to hum along to while I'm playing. If you like Mega Man 2, then you'll most likely enjoy Mega Man 3. I'd still say for the time being that Mega Man 2 is better for introducing newcomers to the series. That's not saying Mega Man 3 doesn't do a good job of helping tell the player what to do, but the level design is not quite as good as Mega Man 2, so it'll probably take a bit of time for new players to get used to and think of a tactic. I'll give Mega Man 3 an 8.2 out of 10, standing for I neither like it more nor dislike it more than the last game.
Alright, this video has gone on much longer than I thought it would, so this is the end of part 1 for my Mega Man reviews. I hope you've enjoyed them, and if you have, please make sure to tune in for part 2 as we look at the last 3 Mega Man games on the NES, Mega Man 4 to 6. My name's Josh Smith, I praise the treasure, and I pick apart the trash. See you later. Oh god, the covers are so bad. Take them away. Take them away. Mega Man looks like he's 40.